I started photography today, this is the exact video I'd want to watch. I'll give you a very clear and concise framework of how to approach photography if you've literally just picked up the camera now. I will simplify what might be complex or very nuanced topics, and I'll give you a few kind of actionable things that you can go out and do in order to start seeing meaningful progress in your photography. This is all based on over 7 years of practical experience and lessons and things that I've learned along the way that would have been a tremendous help if someone sat me down and told me this in one concise video. This video is not about wowing you with my photography skills or fancy b-roll, so treat this like a podcast you can minimize and listen in. There'll be a few little examples, but for the most part, this is just spoken information. Let's start with the first point, and that is know your why. I'm a big believer in self-awareness, because when you're self-aware about your intentions, what you want to achieve, why you're doing something, the rest of everything becomes so much easier. So if you're starting photography because you just want to document your life with a camera, your kids growing up, your travels, holidays, all of that, that is one route to take. If you're starting photography because you want to become the best street photographer in the world, well, that approach would be completely different to the first one. And perhaps you're starting photography because you want to build a social media profile and make a ton of money, then that is a completely different route with a different set of skills and a different set of priorities that you would need to focus on. If you're not sure which one of these you want to be, you'll end up just following random people online and not really doing anything to go down each specific route. You would then be buying gear, or you would be learning things which are completely irrelevant if you just want to take photos of your kids, but might be necessary if you want to shoot for big clients. This is not something that you must have figured out straight away. It might take a year or two for you to understand, but to at least have a degree of inclination towards one of these different routes will help you not only learn the right things, but not waste money and time going down a rabbit hole that will be a dead end. Now, by all means, you might, want to just, let's say, shoot for fun today, but as you get into it, you realize, actually, I enjoy it so much, I want to turn it into a business. Then it is completely cool to change directions and to change your why. But at least having some kind of a starting point initially will make your life so much easier when you're looking to see what you need to learn and what route to take to get to where you want to be. Next, you need to set your expectations. The term overnight success is heavily romanticized because when people do achieve overnight success, it's usually in your face. It's usually talked about. The reality is those people are 0.0001% of the population, and for the most part, there is a huge element of luck involved, not just skill. If you try to replicate that, you will most likely end up disappointed and maybe even bitter. Look at photography as a marathon and not a sprint. This isn't a skill that you will just pick up in a year and then you'll be off to the races shooting for the biggest brands and doing the best work of your life within a couple. The reality is that for most photographers, it takes many years to find their own voice, to figure out what they want to say with their work, to even figure out what they want to do in general. So start looking at photography as a long-term thing that will be next to you as you grow, not something that you will quickly, figure out in a few months, put it on the internet, it explodes, you make loads of money, and everyone's happy. If you really want your Instagram to grow overnight and to get 5-figure deals in your inbox within a year, as I've said, you might be disappointed. Now, I am not saying don't shoot for the stars. It's quite the opposite. Aim as high as you possibly can. Aim as high and aim so high that other people will call you deluded. That's how you want to be doing it. But at the same time, you want to have a marathon and a long-term approach to this. You want to build a good foundation and then slowly build on top. You don't want to just send the skyscraper up as quickly as possible, but not have any strong foundations to hold it up. Now let's talk about everyone's favorite topic, which is camera gear. To some people, cameras are tools and their sole purpose is to get the shot. There are other photographers to whom cameras are status symbols. They're things they love to hold, to care for, and they probably get more attention than their own partners at home. Fundamentally, it doesn't matter which approach you have to cameras, as long as you stick to a few particular principles that will help you. The first principle is pick one brand and stick with it, or one line of cameras. The moment you start having cameras by different brands, that's when things fall apart. Also, the moment you invest heavily into one brand, and then because an influencer or an ambassador told you that this brand is better for you, you then switch over and then you just create a mess. When you stick with one brand, what happens is that you build muscle memory. You learn how the camera works. You learn all the intricacies. You learn how the raw files edit. When you chop and change, you lose that muscle memory. When I used to run workshops in London back in the day, I would remember people would stand there and just mess around with their camera to the point where they would miss all the shots going on around them. And when I would ask, why do you not know how your camera works? They would be like, oh yeah, but I was using the other camera for the last month, and now this is the first time using this camera now, so I kind of forgot how it works. And when you have all of these brands and you're just jumping around, your muscle memory goes to shit. You completely forget how to use it. And if you're standing there messing around with the camera, you'll miss all the shots. Another thing is, if you've invested into a particular system and then you sold it to buy a new system, that whole process consumes so much energy, time and money that I would argue might be better spent on other things. In terms of brands, it honestly doesn't matter. If you have loads of disposable income and you love the idea of something being handmade in Europe, then buy Leica. If you want a technical camera that you can set up exactly how you want, get a Sony. If you're on a budget and you want something that's a bit more friendly, where you don't have to edit the files, look at Fujifilm. All of these cameras will get you the same result. I can post a set of photos on Instagram with a mix of different photos from all of these brands, and for the most part, 99% of people will not be able to tell the difference. With that in mind, what counts is your experience with using the camera and if you enjoy it or not. And this will tie into another point where some people say gear doesn't matter, and I can see that side of the argument, but I would also say that gear does matter very much within the context of you enjoying how to use it. If you bought a camera, let's say if you buy Leica because everyone told you how amazing it is, but you don't enjoy using it, then you're gonna have a very shit time taking photos. If you buy a Sony because everyone's told you how advanced it is, but most of the time you're just confused by all the features, you hate the layout, you hate that it feels a bit more like a computer, then you would have a shit time using it. My point is that find a camera or a brand that aligns the most with you and what you want to do, and as long as you enjoy using it, that's the main thing. In terms of buying gear, you only need 2 cameras and 2 lenses. The first camera is your main one that you would be using for 95% of your photography. The second camera is a pocketable point and shoot. Now that could be something like a Ricoh, or it could be your phone. That doesn't really matter. As long as you can put it in your pocket and take it with you everywhere, that's the only kind of prerequisite for that camera. In terms of lenses, again, you only need 2. A general zoom, like a 24-70, and a 35mm prime. A 24-70 is probably the best lens that you can buy, and that particular focal range will cover 95% of all photography needs. A 35mm prime is smaller, it's lighter, it's typically better in low light, and it will really help you with compositions. A 35mm focal length is great for documenting your day, it's great for travel, it's great for street photography, and in my opinion, even though I love the 50mm, I still think the 35 is the most versatile focal length that you can get. Now let's talk about the key skills that I believe you need to get you 90% there, and there are only 6 to talk about. The first one is to learn your camera inside out. This is where I was talking about earlier by having one system this makes your life a lot easier. Take your manual, buy a guide online, ask ChatGPT, Google, go on YouTube. It doesn't matter how you get your information. All you need is to learn how this camera works inside out, learn all the features, learn all the quirks, figure out all the workarounds for those quirks. And you want to get yourself in a position where you can use the camera blindfolded, and when you see a particular scene or particular opportunity unfolding in front of you, you can quickly put it into whatever mode or whatever settings that you deem necessary in order to get that shot. The last thing you want to be doing is fumbling around with your gear and missing opportunities. The second skill is to have a good understanding of the technicals, but at the same time not take it to the point where you can meter the entire world with your eyes. Being able to understand where shutter speed comes in, where aperture comes in, and ISO, understanding how these elements impact the image, and understanding where you might want to use one or the other, that will take you so far. Because even though you can put the camera in full automatic and still take better photos than 99% of people if you understand a few basics, at the same time, learning settings, or at least learning how they impact the image and your camera, that can open up a whole world of creativity that you didn't have before. Understanding how a slow shutter speed can create motion blur, or how a shallow depth of field can alter the way your eyes go when you look at the photo. These things are very powerful. So I suggest learning about them through experience, and they will really help you. In this example, we are using a high shutter speed of 1/2000th of a second, and selecting this specific shutter speed allows us to freeze the motion in the water that you see at the top. Now, if that was a slower shutter speed, chances are that all of this will be blurred out, which wouldn't necessarily take away from the image, but I think having the water very clearly visible, especially over the silhouette of the girl, just adds to this particular image. In contrast, using a slower shutter speed of 1/20th of a second allows us to create this motion blur that you see right here over the tennis player and the tennis ball as well. And in this particular case, having the motion blur present just gives the illusion that this was a moving shot, there was motion going on. If you froze this using a higher shutter speed, it will look fine, but I just don't think it will have the same effect or feeling as having a bit of motion blur in a tennis player. In this example, we're using a high aperture value of f14 because I wanted to make sure that the foreground, which is the table and the chairs right here, and the umbrella are in focus, as well as the background where you have the oil rig and the container ship and the sea as well. I wanted the entire scene to be in focus, which is easily achieved with a high aperture value of f14. In contrast, in this particular scene, I used f1.4 because I wanted to have clear separation between the subject, which is this guy passing the cigarette, and the background, which is over there all blurred out. Now, if this was f10, for instance, or f8, all of the detail that you see in the background would be visible in focus, and your attention just wouldn't go on the cigarette straight away. Having the shallow depth of field means your attention is immediately directed to the subject without you having to look around the scene. Photography is fundamentally the art of capturing light, and understanding how light impacts your image and what different types of light are out there will have probably the single biggest impact on how your image looks, maybe outside of composition. So this is a very big topic. I'm going to try to condense it into something that's very easy and quick to understand. Fundamentally, there are three types of light source. You have very direct, harsh light, so think of a lunchtime in the summer with the sun beaming on you. You have soft light, so soft light can be diffused with something, so for example a foggy morning. And you have just kind of flat diffused light, where the light is diffused through a giant softbox, so think of a cloudy day where the clouds act like a giant softbox. The light itself, there's no haze in it, it's still quite clean, but it's diffused. Now, when you move on to how the light interacts with your subject and with your image, there are three things that you can do. You can have the light source coming from behind the subject, which is called backlighting. You can have the light source coming from the side of the subject, which is called side lighting, or you can have the light source hitting the subject dead on, which creates a flat image. Neither of these sources of light or directions of light are better than the other. It just depends on your end result. If you have a soft source of light that is coming from the back, you can have a very cinematic style photo, because many cinematic scenes in movies are soft and backlit. Same goes for light coming from the side. If you have very harsh light coming from the side, you can create a very sharp look, where you have certain parts of the image being hit by the sun and other parts of the image fall into shadow. If you have light coming from behind you and hitting the subject flat, you can create a very two-dimensional image. And if you already have a lot of, let's say, contrast or color contrast in the photo that you want to show off, then that type of light would be better, because when you backlight something, you create a lot of contrast and a lot of details can fall into shadow, which can help clean up the scene. But if obviously you don't want to hide those details, and having the light source hitting the subject flat, that will help. Fundamentally, it doesn't really matter. You will figure out what you like and what works best for you to tell the story or whatever it is that you're trying to do. But being aware of these three types of light and three directions from where the light can come and interact with your subject, they will make all the difference. Let's start with harsh light. And this was taken in August in London. As you could see, the light's very harsh, a lot of contrast, not much gradual kind of shadow fall off. And you need to have a very particular scene in order for harsh light to work. Now in this particular case, it works because you have all the contrast over here, plus you have a nice subject with the white dress, which contrasts very nicely with the red wall and the black shadow. In this particular case, it works, but this is a typical harsh light scene. This is what I would call a diffused light, and you have strong sunlight coming in from that direction, but at the same time you have all of this mist from, early morning mist. It was around 5-6 a.m. when I took the shot a few years ago. But because of this mist, it's creating this very diffused, soft glow effect, which you would probably need to use something like the Autumn effect to recreate in editing, but this is obviously done naturally. This is an amazing type of light to work with, and it can make even the most mundane, boring scene look ethereal and interesting. And the final type of light is just soft, general light that you can get on a cloudy day. This is where the cloud acts as a giant softbox. And if you can look in the shadows area of the scooter, you got where the lady is, and the general kind of contrast. It's a very flat, low contrast image. The colors are quite pastel, quite nice. Even though the scooter is quite pastel by itself, but if this was a harsh day, the colors would be a bit harsher as well. This is a good type of light for portraiture and some other photography scenarios, but this is another type of light that you will encounter. Now let's look at backlighting, which is where the light source is coming from behind the subject. In this case, the subject is the tram and the light is coming from the back or behind the tram, and it's hitting this area here. In the process, what it's doing is it's giving the tram a nice little rim light over here and adding a lot of natural contrast into the scene, and altogether this makes for a very pleasing picture. The next type of light is side light, and this is where the light is coming from the side and hitting the subject on this side, casting a shadow on this side. This can create a bit of a sharper look, as you could tell by how clean the separation between the light and the shadow is, and an overall good light source to try and work with, especially as the sun goes a little bit lower towards the end of the day. And the last type of lighting is just straight on flat lighting. In this particular image where you got the dog, the sun was literally behind me and the whole image was being very evenly and flatly lit. The reason it works in this particular case is because you have a lot of natural contrast with the shadows and the highlights. You have a lot of natural color contrast between the kind of orange, golden, brown color of the dog, the orange stone and the blue window, and the overall composition lends itself to being a two-dimensional, very kind of minimal clean shot, which is easily achieved with flat light. Next, you need to learn what to leave in the frame and what to take out. Composition is incredibly important because at the end of the day, it's the one thing that you have full control over, and it's the one thing which will change the narrative of the image completely. Composition can be quite a complex topic, but I can separate it into one main bit and a couple of side bits. So I'm sure you've heard of the rule of thirds. I'm sure you've heard of leading lines and framing. Think of these things, they're important, but think of them as side dishes. Okay, we'll come back to them in a minute. Then look at image balance, which is the photo balanced? That is your main dish. You can have all the leading lines, you can have framing, you can have rule of thirds, but if the image itself isn't balanced, then everything kind of falls apart. Now, what do I mean by image balance? If you look at a typical scene, you will have 4 different elements. You'll have highlights, you'll have shadows, you'll have clean areas or negative space, and you'll have details. Each one of these carries a certain amount of visual weight. Visual weight is basically how quickly it can take your attention and how long it can keep it. So if you look at our image, usually your attention goes towards the highlights first, and then it will trickle down to the negative space, details, and end in the shadows. That's because highlights demand your attention because they're bright. Negative space takes your attention because your mind naturally wants to fill that gap. Details take your attention because you naturally want to figure out what's going on and find something interesting. And shadows, they just kind of get left to last. When you compose an image, you need to be aware that because highlights take up so much of your attention, you would need a bigger area of the other things in order to balance it out. So if you have a very small highlight area, you'd need a slightly bigger shadow area to make it balanced. Otherwise, your eyes can drift to one side of the photo and stay there. If you've ever looked at an image and it felt a bit off, you felt like the image is a bit top heavy, bottom heavy, left or right heavy, 99% of the time it's because the image is not balanced. And all you want to do is rebalance everything to make sure that there is enough shadow detail, enough negative space and details in order to balance out the highlights. Here's the first example of a typical scene with different compositional elements. You have highlights right here. You have negative space and shadows right here. You have more shadow detail there, which is not quite negative space. And you have a lot of detail right here. This detail is balanced out by all the negative space. This darker area is balanced out by all the highlights. And as you can see, the darker area is bigger on average than the highlight area. So altogether, this balances out. In this scene, you have some nice negative area here with a strong color and a bit of a highlight as well. But the primary highlight is, or are the cards in the middle. They take your attention straight away. And then you have a bit of detail in the cigarettes and the coins, and you have a bunch of shadow area over here. So overall, this scene balances out. The shadow balances out the highlights of the cards. The negative space is balanced out by the detail over here, plus the cards and the hands also have detail. And everything just kind of works. And in this example, we have a very strong highlight area, which is the sky that also doubles up as negative space. We have a bit more negative space in the corner over here. And then we have a bunch of details where you have the texture of the water, the boat, the guy, as well as the tarpaulin at the top right there. You have a bunch of shadow right in the bottom here to kind of balance everything out. And as a whole, this image works because you have all of this being balanced out by this, being balanced out by this, negative space, details, and everything works. Once your image is balanced, now you want to move on to the side dishes, so to speak, which is leading lines, framing, and rule of thirds. Rule of thirds is the easiest one out there. Typically, you want to try and place your point of interest somewhere along the thirds of the photo. You can break that rule. Many people do break that rule. But if you're not sure where to place your subject, that's a good place to start. Leading lines are very easy and obvious. Effectively, you want to have something in your frame which leads the viewer to the payoff, to the focal point, to the subject. Framing is where you put your subject or your point of interest within a frame. So a frame can be literally a window. It could be you using a side of a tree to block a bit of the image. It could be anything. So it can even be light, it can be reflections. It doesn't really matter. Get creative with finding different frames in your shots. Here's a classic example of a frame. The subject is the guy right here, and the frame is literally the frame of the door with the window. So it puts the subject right in the middle of that, and your eyes go straight towards that subject. Now, if you didn't have the fog or the sea mist right here, you will get the skyline of New York, and that is framed by these two posts on the boat. Here's another framing example. The subject, these two blokes cleaning the ship, and the frame is this gap in the rail that you see right here to get the shutter, to get the lens right up against the railing and get them framed in the middle. That means that your eyes go straight to the subject and they're not going all the way around trying to figure out what's going on. This is also a good technique to block out a bunch of information you don't need, because behind this railing was a lot of mess that would have taken away from the image. Here's a classic example of leading lines. You have these railings, or fence, sorry, leading straight down into the subject, which is the lady getting out of the water, and that easily takes your eye to the subject. Here's another leading lines example, and this one's very simple. You have one leading line, which is the path, taking you to the subject. You don't always need to have a ton of different leading lines. You could also argue that if you didn't have the grass on the sides, then this little kind of, I'm not sure what that is, maybe it's a little fence or whatever that is, that's also kind of a line within itself, like so, leading you towards the subject right there. Here's a very classic example of the rule of thirds, where the subject, which is the pigeon, is sat roughly in the third of the frame. Not exactly, doesn't have to be exact, but it's kind of towards one of the thirds. Here's another example with a portrait orientation, where you've got the subject right here, and he's standing roughly in the third of the frame as well, which is a pretty natural place for your eye to go. And the last point is to always think in 3 shots. Rather than going for the same type of photo all the time, try to look at the scene and get a wide shot, a medium shot, and a tight shot. So by wide, I mean an establishing photo, a photo that will tell the viewer where you are. So let's say if you're at a market, wide can be a rooftop view looking down. It could be a very wide shot of the market, anything that kind of sets the scene and tells the viewer that you are in a market in the city, not on top of a mountain. The second shot could be the subject, where you find the actual subject, something that piques your interest, something that you would normally shoot, and those are the photos you would go for. It could be people, animals, scenes, buildings, transport, that doesn't really matter. The detail shot is something small, something intricate that on its own will not have any real significance, but when you kind of splice it into the photo set, then it glues everything together. It could be a reflection, it could be, reflection on the body of water, it could be close-up of the market, it could be the writing on the wall, it could be texture of something in the street. It doesn't really matter. What matters is it's visually pleasing, and you can splice it into the photo set and everything will be a bit more coherent. Also, it breaks up all your subject photos, because you can have 5 amazing subject photos, but if you put them all together, they lose their strength. Whereas if you break it up with these little fillers, so to speak, you will have a much, well, not you, but your viewer will have a much better viewing experience. And fundamentally, what I'm trying to say is focus on making albums and photo sets instead of single images. By focusing on albums and photo sets, you will at least have a story or something to show, something to tell, with less explaining to do compared to just one banger photo. Now let's look at the first photo, which is the wide establishing shot. This was taken on the ferry in New York, and here you could see the city in the back, and straight away you know where you are. You're on a boat, it's sunset with the golden light coming in, you're in the city. Now it doesn't straight away tell you it's New York, but unless you can recognize the skyline, but it's in the city, you're on the river, on the lake, in the sea, whatever, on the boat. So pretty clear where you are and what's going on. The next scene is the medium shot, and now you're starting to see the subject or the subjects of this particular photo set. So the first one is the passenger of the ship. Oop, wrong one. It's the passenger of the ship right here. And then you have the Statue of Liberty right there as well. So now you have a much clearer picture about where you are, who's there, the subject, and now you understand that you're on a boat, or sorry, a ferry in New York. And the last photo is this abstract reflection shot inside of the ferry. On its own, it doesn't really do much, but when I combine it with the previous two photos, it creates an overall balanced and interesting photo set. At this point, I want to quickly thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. I've been a paying customer way before they supported the channel, and have now been using their services for over 5 years. Squarespace is at the center of my online presence, and it's what drives my blog, portfolio, store, and newsletter. I appreciate the simplicity of managing everything from a single app because it saves me time and gives me peace of mind knowing that I can make changes or deal with issues from my phone. If you have a business, a side hustle, or simply want your own little corner of the internet to host your photography or build something big, Squarespace offers all the tools you need across all devices. If you want to learn more, get a free trial and then 10% off your first purchase, use the link in the description or enter code RomanFox at checkout. Thank you again to Squarespace for sponsoring, and thank you for watching. Now let's talk about editing, and I'll cover the first topic, which is often asked, and that is what's more important, knowing how to edit or knowing how to shoot. Let me give you an analogy that will make sense. Let's say you've just bought your first car, you've spent £1,000, it's your first car, you're happy, you love it, but it's a banger, right? The oil is leaking everywhere, the chassis has rust in it, but you love it. So you go out, you buy all the polish, and you polish it as much as you can, and it looks great, it looks brand new from a safe distance. The moment you get closer though, you will see past all of that polishing, and you'll see all of the fundamental issues that are wrong with the car. Now, when you buy a brand new car, yes, it's brand new, it's clean, everything is perfect, but it still needs a polish because the paint usually comes with a few issues from the factory. And what polishing does in that stage is it takes an already good product and just makes it a little bit better. With the first example, polishing is trying to hide problems and make something that's bad appear less bad, whereas in the second example, polishing is taking an already good product and just adding a little bit on top to give it the extra few percent. Same with photography. If you have a bad photo, it doesn't matter how much you edit or how good the color grade is, it might look great from a distance, but the moment you start to look at it closer and pay attention, you will see that it's fundamentally a bad image that's disguised to appear less bad. Whereas if you look at a great photo with the light composition and all the fundamentals there, that can look okay without any editing, but the editing just gives it that extra few percent to take it from okay to good. Now let's look at editing hardware and software. Unless you're going to be shooting for high-end clients who are paying you thousands of pounds and they insist on precise colors, you don't need color calibrated monitors and various spider devices that hang off your monitor to get the correct colors. You don't need a Capture One Pro license, and you certainly don't need any kind of fancy editing workstation. All of my editing is done on an iPad with a little iPad pen because I love the experience. I love to just chill in a coffee shop and edit my photos. Now, is that the most professional and correct way to do it? Of course it's not, but it's the most enjoyable for me. With editing, it really doesn't matter. You know, you can have a Windows computer, a phone, a tablet. It really makes no difference. Unless you're shooting on like 200 megapixel RAW files, every computer from the last 5 years will be able to handle almost every RAW file without a problem. In terms of software, you know, everyone uses Lightroom for a reason. It's good, it works. I know many people have various issues with the company, but you know, that's their problem. If you don't want to use Lightroom, even the Photos app on your phone or MacBook comes with pretty much all the tools you need to get a good basic edit. So start with that, start with what your computer comes with, and if you feel like you need to learn a bit more, then maybe look at something like Lightroom. I think there's Darkroom, Pink Room, I don't know, there's so many different apps now. I'm sure you'll find something that works for you. I personally use Lightroom. I sometimes use Capture One, but I find Capture One is better for, let's just say, more complex workflows. But if I'm just chilling with an iPad in a cafe, the Lightroom is perfect for that. Most issues can be fixed with exposure and white balance adjustments. These are the two key things that I think will make the biggest difference to your photo. So if you got an image and you really hate it because it just doesn't look right, try playing with the white balance and the exposure. I can guarantee that in most cases the image might be underexposed and it might be a bit too green, a bit too purple, a bit too blue, or a bit too yellow. By making these three adjustments, you can take an image from something that you would delete to something that has a lot of potential. This happens to me countless times because even though auto white balance is good on most cameras, it's not perfect. And there are certain scenarios where auto exposure and auto white balance can get things wrong, or it can get things which are technically correct, but they don't look very good. Go easy on sharpness and clarity. One thing I've learned is there is a correlation between amateur photographers and how much sharpness and clarity they apply. The less experienced the photographer, the more sharpness and the more clarity. And then when you go to someone who's very experienced, it's either the opposite or extremely selective sharpness and clarity. And the reason for that is because I think people tend to like sharp photos because they associate a sharp image with a high quality image. I've got nothing against it. If you like to sharpen your work, if you want the sharpest possible image so you can zoom in, great. Just don't overdo it, because the best way to get a sharp image is to shoot in good light with a lens that's good. When you sharpen things in Lightroom or whatever app you're using, you're not really making the image sharper, you're making it appear sharper. So when you overdo that, you can create a very crunchy, digital and ugly looking image. So take it easy on those sliders. And the final editing tip I can give you is when you think you're done, step away from the computer and come back the next day. Or if you can't, at least go and cast your eyes on something else, because in most cases you will think you're finished with editing. You will walk away, you'll come back and you'll realize that perhaps you've over edited. Perhaps the image is not as yellow as you remember when you were editing it in the first place. Your eyes are very good at getting used to whatever they're looking at. So if you're used to editing an image and you're gradually making it more yellow, then by the time you get to the end, your eyes are so used to it that you can't see the fact that the image is too warm. And it takes for you to walk away and come back for that to reset. Now let's talk about style. Another common question is, how do I find my style? And photography style is not just the color grade. It's actually a much more complicated topic. And I would argue that you never will find your style. You'll have a temporary style that will follow you for a particular period of time, but fundamentally it will change as you grow. Now, style is made up of many different aspects, right? What focal length you use, what shutter speed you use. I mean, if you mostly shoot at slower shutter speeds, that's a particular style. How you color grade, what environments you shoot in. If you're shooting always in cities or nature, what lighting conditions do you go for? If you're always shooting on sunny days or you only wait for foggy days. All these things will combine into your style. Even the camera that you use, because certain cameras have a particular color profile that people take advantage of, like Fujifilm. Your style is a combination of many different small things that come together to form something which is your style. And as you grow as a photographer, your preferences will change, and that style, which is basically a reflection of where you are in photography, will change with you. Rather than forcing yourself to find a style, I suggest just focus on becoming a better photographer, learning skills, improving how you light things, composition, just everything. Focus on photography and the style will develop in the background. Because if you try to force a style, you might end up with something that you really don't like in a week. Whereas if you let the style form around you as you're shooting, then you will not get into a position where you're all of a sudden not liking it, because it's a reflection of what you do, and it will change as you get older. Whether you started today or you've been doing photography for 10 years, always keep learning because it's the only way you will ever progress. Now, learning can be on a bigger level. You can attend workshops to learn a completely new set of skills, or it could be on a smaller level where you learn how to adjust exposure using the curves feature. It doesn't really matter, but look at photography as a whole, look at areas which you know you might not be as good as you want to be, and focus on those areas. Now, it could be storytelling, it could be editing, it could be your understanding of gear. That doesn't matter. Always be learning because it's the only way you will ensure that you will keep going with this craft and still enjoy it. Because the moment you stop learning, you'll become stagnant, and that's when you just get bored. All right, and on to the last point of the video. This will sound very cheesy, but it's applicable. If you have a particular goal for your photography, there's something you want to achieve, you need to have an almost delusional level of self-belief in order to do that. If you believe that you will achieve whatever that is, then you will. If you believe that you won't, then you won't. Now, this isn't some woo-woo fucking nonsense type of crap. This is just how it works. If you really want to achieve something, put all your mind to it, put all your energy to it, and it will work out one way or another. Might not work out exactly how you wanted, but it will still be in a different place compared to today. So that's it. I hope this video has been useful. It's now, God, it's nearly an hour I'm sitting here recording this. Hopefully it's not going to be that long by the time it goes out. And that's it. This is literally everything that I wish people told me when I started with photography. And I hope that you picked up one or two things, and hopefully it's given you some motivation or some little bits and bobs that you can take into your photography going forward. I've lost my voice probably 5 minutes into making this. So yeah, hopefully it doesn't sound too bad. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.